There are 6 things I'd like to tell you about my grandma. Number 1. She loved animals. From cats to birds, horses to goats, to even a tortoise. From big to small, she'd owned them all at one point. And with a heart bigger than that combined of all of the animals that she had ever come into contact with, she set out to do good for the world and make a difference. She was a professional carer for people in her younger days, predominantly grandchildren mixed with animals in her latter. Every pet a rescue that had rescued her in return, if only for a short time. As my 2 cousins and I grew older and no longer needed her direct care, she was left with a large, empty house, filled only with 2 cats, a dog, and her mind. It broke my heart the day we had to give them away and she left them all behind. And just like her pets, she was also rehomed with different company, with nurses and care, as if the once still consistency of her life in the form of her animals that were there for her had now been forcefully replaced by something that was not wanted, but rather needed. A prior carer, now being cared for and fully dependent, the lack of prior care that you would have thought would have come from other family members who never had the time to visit. Time and time again, she'd sit with the same few of us that took the time to see her on repeat, and even at the very end, she'd never see the rest. Like the time that she had spent raising them had been erased and replaced with things that were seemingly more important than the one who had given them life. 7 children. Many more grandchildren, countless other relatives, and less than the fingers on her hands that she used to count with that allegedly had the time worth using to see her on more than a yearly basis. I guess family to some has less to do with others and more to do with being accidentally selfish. Number 2. She believed in aliens. She'd sit and listen to conspiracies, convinced that certain lights in the night sky were the FBI hiding secret life forms, maybe testing futuristic technology seen by her own eyes on quiet nights when few others would be looking. Humans are too small and too insignificant in a vast, unexplored solar system. Our life couldn't possibly be the only thing out there that is alive and living. Years later, that fantasy became a reality, as an alien abducted her brain and took her to a different place or space that was so confined it defied the depth of our own reality, that made hers a new, fanatical normality, a parasite that made her less her and more obscurity. And she'd read a bit about mind control, but never before thought that she would become a victim. But this was not like the stories in her conspiracy books. This was a very real creature that showed itself to millions of very real people each year, whose data could not be found in her type of favourite textbook, but more in research articles about neuroanatomy. Books. Number 3. She loved to read. Every book a new adventure to escape reality, to find a way to see the world in a different perspective and let loose a decaying mind in an active tale of both fact and fiction. And it was as if the deeper she got in her own story, the more friction crossed over, and what was real for her was not relative to what was happening in the present time, always at a different chapter. We lived in 2017, whereas she read and relived 1949. We were living in a different part to where she was at in her story. Hers, starting at childhood, reminiscing on past memories, believing loved ones who had passed away had passed her by just moments ago, alive and well. She was not in her 80s, but a cross between childhood and fragmented memories, and who am I to tell her the truth that she's living in a different time, and then what she believes isn't in fact real? We're the characters in present time's chapter had all died years ago, and she needs to keep up with the story to please our breaking hearts, to give us hope that she can not only restart to read and remember the same uniform sections, but move on to the next segment to remember where we are up to now, break out from the fiction and break into reality. But every text of truth that I could paint to her in order for her to see was a new wound opened up. What was safer for her to be left alone and left sewn shut, because what she did not know that she had forgotten could not possibly harm her in this warped fiction reality that she existed in, as if she'd remember what I told her the next time I saw her. And she'd never remember it for long. She couldn't remember. Number 4. She loved sugary foods but was a heavily medicated diabetic. A sweet irony that proved that cruelty did not discriminate between the good and the bad. We all yearn for what we can't have, and what I wanted was a time machine to change this feeling and take me both back to the past to change some of the outcomes of what could have been now, and also to the future to find, number 5, the fact that my grandma had dementia and I wanted to find a cure. Because there is no cure. We all watched as the person we loved evaporated under the intensity of this curse. This alien parasite had taken her to another universe, claimed another host, and the woman that we loved the most was just a shell of past, looped memories. This monster, raising its jagged teeth and claws and gnawing down heavily on my grandma's delicate mind in front of us for everyone to see, burying in her own memories which got harder for her to find, blissfully ripping apart lines of her story so she was not able to fully come back. Like a scratched DVD that sometimes couldn't always free itself from sticking, occasionally getting back on track but then replaying and being stuck once more, as if the tears in our souls couldn't break away from us and patch up to make hers whole again, as if the sores that ached across our bodies couldn't be restored with ease like how easy it was for her to be able to forget. We didn't have the misfortune of being able to forget. Towards the end, she slipped further, confusing giraffes seen in children's animal books that she could now barely read to candlesticks and trees, playing tricks on her mind because of the similar structure, but she could not structure what her mind was seeing, her mouth was speaking, and her brain believing. I wore a charity dementia wristband, as if my hand could make a difference and leave a fingerprint on a condition that I did not fully understand at the time. And I wish that I had understood sooner and spotted the signs that seemed so obvious from an outsider's perspective, but not to mine. Because when we opened our eyes and took her to get tested, it had progressed too far for treatment to successfully delay the process sustainably. And from then on, every day became more of a game, bland and repetitive, bland and repetitive, bland and repetitive, always the same thing, with the only difference being time. Time. It's time that these things were spoken about more. We all vaguely know about dementia, but not always the action or the cause. And if even one more person got tested earlier and diagnosed, that would be another fraction of a life saved earlier, who would now have more time to spend with loved ones and loved ones with them. We need to look out for the early signs. Dementia isn't just forgetting or only a side effect of old age. It's our duty to not forget about the potentially affected. And I know it's easier to remain oblivious and not come to terms with reality when it's happening to a loved one in front of us. But as we're choosing to live our fiction and denying what is really happening, they can't help and choose when to access theirs as they slip further away with time. If we came together and volunteered, donated, the state of research may incline to a point of progression, because there is no cure, but there is time. The last thing, number 6. She was still in there, somewhere, and she was loved very dearly.